Ilhan Omar entered the Fox News studio prepared to label J.D. Vance a racist before he uttered a single word. The Marine from Ohio looked at a congresswoman who had allegedly married her biological brother to secure a green card, minimized the 9/11's attacks as merely some people doing something, and instructed Somalis in Somalia to question which country she truly represented. He had arrived with the marriage certificates she had been evading for years. This was not destined to be a standard debate. It was going to be a reckoning. Although Fox News had framed the event as a policy discussion regarding immigration and American assimilation, every viewer understood the true subject matter. For years, grave questions had surrounded Ilhan Omar, which the mainstream media consistently refused to investigate, dismissing every inquiry as conspiracy theory or racism. Did she truly marry her brother, Ahmed Nursaid Elmi, in 2009 to commit immigration fraud and obtain his green card? Why did she downplay the most devastating terrorist attack on American soil by describing it as nothing more than some people doing something? How did a congresswoman earning a salary of $174,000 annually accumulate millions, while paying her husband's firm nearly $3 million from campaign funds? Why did she disseminate anti-Semitism so vile and apparent that her own Democratic Party was compelled to condemn her twice through official House resolutions? Furthermore, why did she travel to Somalia and tell crowds there to ask us what country we are from, rather than simply affirming she was an American representative? J.D. Vance had dedicated 3 weeks to preparing for this encounter, and he had not wasted his time on policy white papers or abstract philosophical arguments. He possessed actual marriage certificates from Hennepin County, Minnesota, which demonstrated that Ilhan Omar married Ahmed Nursaid Elmi on February 12, 2009. He held school enrollment records secured by researchers in Mogadishu, listing both Ilhan Nursaid Elmi and Ahmed Nursaid Elmi with identical parent names. He had obtained family photographs posted on social media depicting Omar and Elmi together as children in the same household, before everything was systematically deleted once the allegations emerged. He possessed screenshots of posts from Omar's own relatives referring to Elmi as her brother in both English and Somali, archived before the mass deletion occurred. He held tax documents obtained through legal channels showing she filed joint returns with Ahmed Hirsi during years she was legally married to Elmi. He had official findings from the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board documenting her violations. He had video footage of every controversial statement she had ever made, along with her congressional voting records. All of this material was organized, verified, and ready to display on the massive screens at Fox. What happened when a Marine who had served in Iraq and taken his oath seriously confronted someone who had potentially defrauded the very immigration system he defended would expose the largest cover-up in modern congressional history. The shield of Islamophobia that had protected Omar for years was not going to function against a veteran armed with documented evidence. The Fox News studio was packed with 450 people, and the energy was palpable from the moment the doors opened. Omar's small section of supporters sat together wearing hijabs and holding signs regarding Islamophobia, looking defiant, but clearly uncomfortable in such deeply hostile territory. The remainder of the audience was overwhelmingly pro-Vance, including a significant number of military veterans wearing their service on caps and shirts, there specifically to watch a fellow Marine ask the questions politicians had been too afraid to voice. Ilhan Omar entered first to scattered applause from her supporters and sustained loud boos from everyone else. She wore a brightly colored hijab and an expensive-looking suit, carrying herself with the defiant pride of someone who had weathered controversy by labeling it all bigotry. She looked prepared to deploy her standard defense strategy, where any criticism would be Islamophobia, any evidence would be fabricated, and any question would be racist. She had perfected this shield over 5 years in Congress and assumed it would work here just as it had everywhere else. she had catastrophically underestimated J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance walked out 30 seconds later to a roar that lasted nearly 4 minutes. At 39 years old, with the bearing and haircut of the Marine he had been, wearing a simple dark suit, he carried 3 thick folders which he set down next to his chair with a deliberate thud. Everyone heard the sound, and the contrast was immediately stark. She looked like a politician prepared for victim narratives, while he looked like a prosecutor arriving with evidence. Brett Baer opened with standard language about respectful dialogue and focusing on substance rather than personal attacks. That aspiration would last approximately 2 minutes. When asked for her opening statement, Omar deployed her practiced opening, speaking in that distinctive accent that her supporters found authentic and her critics found grating. She stated she was there because certain people refused to accept that a black Muslim refugee woman could serve in Congress and represent Americans. She claimed the attacks against her were rooted in Islamophobia and racism, coming from people who cannot accept that someone who looks like her and believes what she believes can be American, but she insisted she would not be silenced. Her supporters applauded enthusiastically as she sat back, looking satisfied and confident she had established the moral framework that would protect her. Vance looked at her with something between pity and contempt. When he spoke, his voice carried that slight Appalachian accent that marked him as genuinely from working-class America rather than merely performing it. He told the Congresswoman he was going to talk about evidence tonight, not theories or speculation, but documents, records, and her own statements. He added that he was going to ask direct questions that required yes or no answers. He opened his first folder, and the studio screens lit up with an image that made Omar visibly tense. A marriage certificate from Hennepin County, Minnesota, dated February 12, 2009, showing Ilhan Abdullahi Omar married to Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi. He suggested they start there, as the marriage certificate filled every screen in the studio, official and undeniable. Omar's name and Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi's name were bound together in legal marriage, documented by the state of Minnesota. Vance let the image sit there, and the silence became heavy and uncomfortable. Vance began with a conversational but firm tone, noting that she came to America as a refugee in 1995 when she was 12 years old because Somalia was in chaos and civil war. He reminded her that America took her in when her country could not protect her, gave her safety, education, and opportunity, eventually granting citizenship and even electing her to Congress as one of 435 people chosen to represent over 300 million Americans. He paused, letting that history establish itself before continuing to talk about Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi, the man she married in February 2009. Omar's face had gone pale, for she knew exactly where this was heading and had no good answers prepared because she had never been forced to actually answer before. He asked if she married him on February 12, 2009, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, noting that it is a matter of public record, and demanded a yes or no answer. Omar tried to deflect into her prepared script about her personal marital history being subject to scrutiny, but Vance interrupted with marine directness, cutting through any attempt at evasion. He asked again if she married Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi on February 12, 2009, and she could not deny a public marriage record that was on screen for millions to see, so she admitted that the marriage occurred. He thanked her, then proceeded to show why millions of Americans believe Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi is her brother. The screens changed to show old-school enrollment records from Somalia, documents that researchers had spent months obtaining and verifying. Vance walked toward the screens to narrate what they showed, explaining that these school records from Mogadishu, from before she came to America, list students and their parents. He pointed out Ilhan Noor Saeed Elmi listed as a student with parents, Noor Saeed Elmi and his wife, and then in the same records, Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi listed as a student with the exact same parent names. He turned to face Omar directly, stating that same parents and same household mean According to these educational records from Somalia, she and Ahmed Elmi are siblings with the same mother and father. The audience was completely silent, and even Omar's supporters looked troubled, staring at documents they couldn't easily dismiss. Vance pulled out photographs next, and they appeared on screen, images clearly from decades ago showing a young girl who was unmistakably Omar and a young boy standing together in what looked like family settings. He explained these were family photographs posted on social media before they were all deleted once allegations surfaced, showing her and Ahmed Elmi as children together in the same family and household. He showed more evidence, specifically screenshots of social media posts archived before deletion from people who appeared to be family members, written in both English and Somali, referring to Ahmed Elmi as brother in the context of discussing family. He emphasized that these posts were from her own relatives before everything got scrubbed from the internet, and her own family members referred to Ahmed Elmi as her brother. Vance walked back toward his chair but didn't sit, picking up another document to discuss the name itself. He noted that Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi has her father's name as his first and middle names, which is a Somali naming tradition where children carry their father's name. He let all that evidence sit for a moment before laying out the theory that investigators believe happened, pointing out that everything he was about to describe matches the evidence perfectly. He explained that Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi came to America needing immigration status and a green card, but as her brother, he couldn't get status easily on his own. Since she was already a United States citizen by 2009, she married him as brother and sister, committing immigration fraud to get her brother a green card through spousal immigration. The timeline appeared on screen, and Vance narrated it like he was telling a story about fraud rather than reading bullet points. In 2009, she married him. He filed for permanent resident status as her spouse, and from 2009 through 2017, he established his status and life in America, using their marriage as his legal foundation. In 2017, once he was completely established and his green card was secure, she divorced him, and in 2018 she legally married Ahmed Hirsi, the man she had actually been with all along and the father of her children. Vance pulled out the most damaging evidence yet, tax returns showing joint filing, noting that during the years she was legally married to Ahmed Elmi from 2009 to 2017, she was also filing joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi. He declared that having two husbands for tax purposes is tax fraud on top of immigration fraud. He showed the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board findings, stating that Minnesota investigated this, found violations, and fined her $3,469, which she paid. He asserted that paying the fine is an admission that something was wrong with her tax filings during her marriage to Elmi. Vance walked closer to Omar's chair as she sat, frozen, unable to mount an effective defense against documents and records. He told her he was going to ask her directly on national television, with millions of Americans watching, and all this evidence displayed for everyone to see. He paused, and the silence was absolute, as he asked if Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi is her brother. The question hung in the air, and everyone waited for this pivotal moment. Omar's face flushed as she looked at her handlers off stage, then back at Vance. But when she finally spoke, it wasn't an answer. She claimed these disgusting smears were rooted in Islamophobia and racism and had been investigated and debunked. But Vance cut her off with a hard voice, stating that was not an answer. He repeated that he asked a simple yes or no question about whether Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi is her brother. She refused to dignify it, but Vance's voice had that command tone Marines learn, as he asked again if he is her brother. Omar wouldn't answer, pivoting to attacking the question as racist, the evidence as fabricated, and the whole line of inquiry as bigotry. Vance let her finish, then delivered his response quietly but firmly, pointing out that she won't say no, which is what everyone needs to understand. He emphasized that he didn't ask a complicated policy question, but asked if a specific man is her brother, and she refused to say no. He gestured to the screen still showing the evidence, challenging her to explain how the school records are wrong clarify whose family photos are shown, tell why her relatives were lying when they called him brother, and explain the coincidence of his name carrying her father's name. Vance walked back to center stage, noting she wouldn't explain any of it and just calls everyone who asks questions racist. He stated she won't deny he's her brother, won't take a DNA test to prove he's not, and just attacks anyone who looks at the evidence. He turned to face her directly for his conclusion, stating he served in Iraq as a United States Marine, took an oath to defend this country and its laws, and fought to protect borders and the immigration system. He accused her of possibly committing immigration fraud, marrying her own brother to get him a green card, violating federal law, and defrauding the very system that saved her from Somalia. His final line was delivered with quiet intensity, challenging her to prove he is not her brother by taking a DNA test, showing America the results, and releasing her full immigration records. He concluded that she won't, because she can't, and her silence tells everyone everything they need to know. The audience erupted, and even some of Omar's supporters looked shaken by her refusal to simply deny the accusation. Vance didn't give her time to recover or redeploy her victim narrative, as he was already pulling out his next folder and the screens were changing to show a date everyone recognized. September 11th, 2001. Vance began quietly, stating he was 17 years old that day, and the room went silent because this was personal. He recalled being a senior in high school in Middletown, Ohio, watching the news like everyone else, seeing the second plane hit live, watching the towers fall, and watching people jump from burning buildings because staying inside meant burning alive. He paused, and in that pause was the memory that tens of millions of Americans shared. He joined the Marines partly because of that day, understanding they had been attacked. Al-Qaeda had declared war on America, and they had to fight back. He went to Iraq, served in a combat zone, and did his part in the war that started because 19 terrorists murdered nearly 3,000 Americans that morning. Vance looked up from his notes and directly at Omar, proposing they talk about how she described September 11th. The screen showed Omar at a CARE event in March 2019, speaking casually about civil liberties and Muslim American rights. Then came the line that would define her callousness forever, claiming CARE was founded after 9/11s because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Vance replayed just that one phrase, "Some people did something," then let it play again, and one more time. The repetition made it sound even more callous than the first hearing. Vance pulled out a list but didn't read it like a list. Instead, he told stories. He spoke of Gordon Amith, Jr., who worked at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of the North Tower, was 32 years old, called his mother that morning. She heard the phone go dead, and his body was never recovered. He paused before continuing with Edelmiro Abad, a securities processor at Keefe, Bruyette, and Woods, 54 years old, a father and husband working in the towers that morning. He stated he's not some people who had something done. He was murdered, killed by terrorists. Vance continued with more names, not in a mechanical list but as individual human tragedies, listing Marie Rose Abad, Andrew Anthony Abate, and Vincent Abate. He looked up from his list, noting these are just the first 5 names alphabetically out of 2,977 Americans who were murdered, not some people who had something done to them. They were murdered by Al-Qaeda terrorists who hijacked planes and flew them into buildings full of innocent people. Vance's voice changed from recounting names to something with real anger behind it as he spoke of the 343 New York City firefighters who ran into those burning towers. They went up the stairs while everyone else was running down, knowing the buildings might collapse. But they went anyway and died crushed under millions of tons of steel and concrete. These weren't some people doing something. These were heroes sacrificing themselves for strangers. He pulled out photographs from 9/11s, the burning towers, people covered in ash fleeing the collapse, and first responders buried in rubble, and the images were devastating. He said he served with Marines who joined because of 9/11s, guys who saw those towers fall and said, "This is my country under attack and I need to defend it." Some of them didn't come home, killed in Iraq and Afghanistan fighting the same kind of terrorism that murdered Americans that day. Vance turned to face Omar, noting she called it, "Some people did something," like it was a parking violation or a minor incident, acting like the worst terrorist attack on American soil was just something that happened. Omar tried to defend herself, claiming the quote had been taken out of context and weaponized, but Vance's voice rose to a shout, declaring, "There is no context that makes that okay." He emphasized, there is no context where calling mass murder "some people did something" is acceptable, noting she didn't say terrorists, Al-Qaeda, attack, murdered, or slaughtered. He showed clips of her defending the statement when criticized, pointing out she hadn't apologized or clarified, just claimed people were twisting her words. He noted she never said she should have been clearer or honored the victims better, but just attacked everyone who was offended by her minimization of their tragedy. Vance walked toward center stage, carrying the weight of his military service in his bearing. He reminded her that America gave her refuge when Somalia was too dangerous. Yet when 19 terrorists attacked America and murdered nearly 3,000 people, she couldn't even properly describe what happened. He let that sink in before continuing, stating he wore the uniform and lost friends in the war that came from that day, while she minimizes the sacrifice and the attack that started it all. Vance returned to his chair and delivered his final assessment, sitting down and looking directly at Omar. He told her that's not just offensive or insensitive. That is contempt for America, for the victims, and for everyone who served and sacrificed. He declared that her inability to honor Americans properly when they're murdered by terrorists disqualifies her from representing Americans in Congress. The silence that followed was profound, as even Omar's supporters couldn't find a defense for those words when the evidence was her own voice, minimizing mass murder. Vance moved immediately to his next attack, giving Omar no chance to reset, proposing they talk about anti-Semitism because her hatred of Jews is so obvious that her own party was forced to condemn her twice. The screen displayed House Resolution 183, and when Omar tried to interrupt with her standard defense about criticizing Israel, Vance spoke over her. He insisted this isn't about Israel policy, but about her spreading classic anti-Semitic tropes that have been used to justify violence against Jews for centuries. He wanted to show everyone exactly what she said, so the screens filled with Omar's tweets, and Vance read them aloud. He cited a February 2019 response where someone asked why American politicians support Israel, and she replied, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," with a money bag emoji. He explained she is saying Jews buy political support with money and control politics with cash, which is textbook anti-Semitism and Nazi propaganda. The next tweet appeared from November 2012, where she wrote, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel." Vance looked up, noting she is claiming Jews have mystical powers to hypnotize people, another classic anti-Semitic trope found in the protocols of the Elders of Zion. He showed more tweets where she compared Israel to Nazi Germany, suggested Jewish Americans had dual loyalty, and spread conspiracy theories about Jewish influence. He argued this isn't criticizing Israeli policy, it is spreading hatred of Jews using the same language used to persecute them for centuries. Vance pulled out the House resolutions, explaining that her own party was so embarrassed they passed an official resolution specifically because of her statements. He showed the vote count of 407 to 23, noting nearly unanimous agreement between Democrats and Republicans to condemn what she said. He pointed out that her own party leadership, including Nancy Pelosi, voted to condemn her statements. Vance paused before delivering the kicker, noting she did it again and couldn't help herself, so they had to condemn her a second time. The second resolution appeared H.Res. 489 from July 2019, meaning her own party had to officially rebuke her twice in 4 months for Jew hatred. He asked when that has ever happened to any member of Congress, leaving the question unanswered. He added that she voted against Iron Dome funding, one of only 9 members to vote no on the defensive system that protects Israeli civilians from Hamas rockets. Vance's voice took on that Marine intensity again, stating he served with Jewish Marines, who were some of the bravest people he ever knew. Yet she spreads conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the world. He walked closer to her chair, noting she supports BDS economic warfare against the only democracy in the Middle East and compares Israel to apartheid South Africa. The final assessment came with genuine disgust, emphasizing that her own Democrats condemned her twice, not just Republicans. He told her she can't hide behind criticism of Israel when she is spreading the same anti-Semitic tropes the Nazis used, and her own party is embarrassed by her bigotry. Vance grabbed his next folder, and the screen displayed the logo for the E Street Group. He proposed they talk about money, specifically campaign money going to her husband's company, as the name Tim Minot and the number $2,800,000 appeared on screen. He stated that her husband, Tim Minot, owns the E Street Group, a political consulting firm, and since 2018, her campaign has paid his company approximately $2.8 million. Vance let that enormous number sit before discussing how Tim became her husband, a story involving an affair, 2 broken marriages, and millions in campaign funds. He pulled out divorce filings and narrated a timeline starting in 2018 when Tim Minot was married to Beth Minot, and his company started working for her campaign. In August 2019, Beth Minot filed for divorce, alleging that her husband's travel and long hours appeared to be related to his affair with Representative Ilhan Omar. Vance showed the court document with that section highlighted, proving she claimed under oath that his travel for the campaign was cover for the affair. The timeline continued showing Omar divorced Ahmed Hirsi in October 2019, was photographed with Tim Minot in December, and married him in March 2020. Vance summarized that Tim worked for her campaign. They started an affair while married to others, both divorced their spouses, married each other, and her campaign kept paying his company. He pulled out payment records showing nearly $3 million total for travel and consulting fees paid to her husband's company using money from working Americans. The Minnesota findings appeared showing the board found violations and issued the largest fine ever levied against a sitting House member at that time. Vance's voice shifted to genuine working-class outrage, explaining how his family struggled with poverty while she came as a refugee and is now wealthy, paying her husband millions in campaign funds. He turned to face her directly, noting the FEC received multiple complaints alleging she is using campaign funds for personal benefit and funneling donor money to herself. He called it theft with paperwork and stated that using opportunity to steal from working people's donations to enrich her family is corruption, not public service. Vance pulled out video footage from August 2022 when she visited Somalia and spoke to large crowds. The screen showed Omar speaking passionately in Somali, with subtitles translating her command to "Ask us what country we are from." Vance played it again, emphasizing the repetition made the meaning unmistakable. She told Somalis to ask her what country she is from, rather than stating she is an American congresswoman. He paused, then asked the obvious question. What country is she from? Omar tried to give a complex answer about diaspora communities and transnational identity, but Vance interrupted, asking for a simple answer. He observed quietly that she can't say America first, or clearly state where her loyalty lies. He pulled out the oath of office and read it, emphasizing the pledge to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies. He looked up, stressing that allegiance is to the United States, not Somalia or any other country. Vance set down the oath document and spoke from personal experience, saying he meant every word when he joined the Marines and was willing to die for it. He told Omar she took that same oath but goes to Somalia and promotes its interests while voting against American interests constantly. He noted she votes against condemning Hamas, supporting Israel, sanctions on Iran, and defense measures, siding with groups hostile to America. He walked closer, stating he served one country and fought for one nation, and asking who she is serving because her record raises serious questions. His voice became harder as he mentioned friends buried at Arlington Cemetery who gave everything for America, while she is in Congress and can't clearly state she puts America first. His conclusion was devastating, reminding her that America saved her from Somalia and gave her everything. Yet she goes back and won't even clearly say she is American. His final line came with absolute finality, suggesting maybe she is representing the wrong country. Vance pulled out his final evidence, video footage from an interview where she discusses a college course. The clip played showing Omar making exaggerated air quotes with her fingers when Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah were mentioned as terrorists. Vance replayed it twice without commentary, as the dismissive air quotes spoke for themselves. Vance began quietly when the clip finished, stating he served in Iraq and fought against the same kind of terrorism Al-Qaeda represents. He spoke of seeing what terrorists do up close and losing friends to IEDs and suicide bombers because of that ideology. He noted she makes air quotes like Al-Qaeda isn't really a terrorist organization or like it is debatable. The numbers appeared on screen as Vance recited that Al-Qaeda murdered 2,977 Americans on September 11th. His voice rose as he said Marines he served with were in that war because of what Al-Qaeda did, yet she suggests they aren't really terrorists. He showed the Hezbollah connection, noting they killed 241 United States Marines in Beirut in 1983 with a truck bomb. Vance walked toward Omar's chair, pointing out she makes air quotes, suggesting Hezbollah isn't really a terrorist group either. He pulled together the pattern, listing her minimization of 9/11s, air quotes about Al-Qaeda, opposition to anti-terrorism measures, and defense of state sponsors of terrorism. He asked a simple question with marine intensity. Is Al-Qaeda a terrorist organization? Yes or no? Omar couldn't give a simple yes, starting to explain context and American foreign policy, but Vance demanded a yes or no answer. She kept deflecting and refusing to give a direct answer, so Vance let her refusal stand as its own indictment. He stated she can't even clearly call Al-Qaeda terrorists or condemn the group that killed nearly 3,000 Americans. His conclusion was absolute, declaring that not knowing who the enemies are disqualifies her from national security decisions. Vance stood and walked to center stage for his final statement, leaving his folders behind to speak from conviction. He wanted to make very clear what this is really about, recounting how he watched the towers fall at 17 and joined the Marines to serve the country that gave his family a chance. His voice carried the weight of that service as he described going to a combat zone and doing his part to defend America against the same terrorism that killed thousands. He turned to face Omar, recounting how she came as a refugee at 12 years old, when Somalia was a failed state and America gave her safety, education, and citizenship. He listed how she repaid that gift, starting with possibly committing immigration fraud by marrying her brother, a claim supported by overwhelming evidence she refuses to deny or test. He moved to the second betrayal, her minimization of September 11th as some people did something, failing to honor the victims of the worst attack on American soil. He listed the third betrayal as spreading anti-Semitism so vile her own Democrats condemned her twice for using Nazi tropes. Fourth, she paid nearly $3 million to her husband's company and had an affair with him while married to others, resulting in a massive campaign finance fine. Fifth, she went to Somalia and told them to ask what country she is from, raising questions about dual loyalty she won't clearly answer. Sixth, she makes air quotes about Al-Qaeda and can't clearly call them terrorists. Vance stopped walking and stood still, looking directly at Omar, reminding her they both took oaths to defend the Constitution. He stated he honored that oath and was willing to die for America, but she broke hers by defrauding the system, spreading hate, enriching herself, and showing loyalty to Somalia. The personal element came through now as he spoke of friends at Arlington who took their oaths seriously, while she spits on their sacrifice. Vance walked closer for his final statement, telling her she came with nothing and America gave her everything. Yet she attacks, defrauds, and spreads hate. He turned to the cameras, stating, "Americans deserve representatives who love this country and keep their oaths, not someone who is corrupt and won't say America first." He delivered the final line to Omar, saying the difference between them is that he served America while she defrauded it. And America deserves better. The standing ovation lasted 7 full minutes, deafening with chants of USA, as Marine veterans in the audience stood at attention. Omar sat unable to respond because every point was backed by evidence, like marriage certificates, school records, and her own words. The Islamophobia defense had failed against a Marine with receipts, and the video reached 198 million views within 1 week. Within 48 hours, the FBI faced overwhelming pressure to investigate the marriage fraud, and the phrase, "Is Ahmed Elmi your brother?" trended for weeks. Conservative groups organized DNA test challenges, and her refusal to take one became the story itself. Her own Democratic Party began distancing themselves, with Pelosi refusing to defend her and invitations drying up. The military veteran community responded with intensity, demanding her removal, while Muslim Americans were deeply divided. 6 months later, a moderate Democrat announced a primary challenge with the slogan, "America First, not Somalia First," raising over $4 million in his first week. Polling showed Omar's support collapsing due to the combination of fraud, anti-Semitism, and corruption allegations. 1 year after the debate, facing defeat and investigation, Omar announced she wouldn't seek re-election. Vance had destroyed her politically by doing what the mainstream media never would, asking uncomfortable questions and showing evidence she couldn't refute. This wasn't a debate between competing philosophies, but a confrontation between a Marine's oath and a Congresswoman's betrayal. J.D. Vance had deployed evidence she couldn't dismiss, such as marriage certificates, tax documents, and video of her own statements. Every defense she used failed against a Marine who had done his homework and presented verified documentation. Most damaging was what she couldn't do. She couldn't deny Elmi was her brother, couldn't take a DNA test, and couldn't clearly say she put America first. Vance proved that military service gives moral authority, that evidence defeats victimhood narratives, and that America deserves representatives who love the country enough to defend it.